And then I'm going to share the screen. Wait, there we go. And now I just got to get to the right page. 50. Let's see, we are on 11, right? 10A. Oh, we're past this. There we go. Okay. So let's start with it. So we've gotten to the point now, we finally got through that section in the Mishnah of Megillah where they were focused on the on the formula of the only difference between this and this is X. And now we're back to the book of Esther, and we're going to do this midrashic these midrashic passages on the book and on the themes. All right, so let's see, what do we have here? Did we? Oh, that's right. We started this last week, and I pointed out this idea of what does it mean, petach la pitcha, that in this case, Rav Dimi Bar Yitzhak introduced this passage with an introduction from here. What does that mean? Well, most likely these were lectures that people were giving before their students, and the process, very often the midrashic process was you would begin with a verse from somewhere else in the Bible and then connect it to your text that you were looking at. And two possibilities, at least, of why they did it this way. One is that this shows that the Bible is seamless. It all comes from the same author, in some, maybe not directly, because we know that some of the texts don't come directly from God, like the book of Esther wasn't written by God. But they're all written with either they come directly from God or they are written with divine inspiration from God. And therefore, any passage anywhere in the canon should relate to any other passage because they all come from the same source. And so that's one one thing that we can learn by the fact that they're starting, in this case, a passage from Ezra, and it relates to the book of Esther, or a passage from the book of Psalms, and it relates to the book of Esther. The other possibility is, and Bert Vysotsky expressed this in his teaching of Midrash, is that it may have been entertainment. I mean, not entertainment in the sense of like a comedy show, but entertainment in the sense of how do you draw your audience in? If you begin with a passage from Psalms and you're talking about our subject today is the book of Esther, and I'm going to start with a passage from Psalms, the response is, huh? What are you talking about? But then, depending on the skill of the author, they're able to connect it. Oh, this is how it's related to the book of Esther. And the listeners are like, wow, that's amazing. So that's another possibility, that they were doing it as out of a sense of to draw their listeners in. It's not so different from a sermon, where a sermon, you start off with something and you draw your audience in to the main theme, and they're sitting there trying to, like, where is he going? Oh, that's how it's connected. Okay, so that's what it is here. That's what his lecture he introduced with a passage from Ezra, and that's not much of a stretch because, of course, Ezra is post Esther, if Esther is a historical text, in that this is the Persians have conquered the Babylonians. Well, no, wait, but Ezra is post. I'm trying to think where Ahasuerus is in the. Yeah, he would, I guess, if Ahasuerus was a historical Persian king, he would have been before the period of Ezra. Ezra would have been a king after, because we'll see that the temple is rebuilt under Darius II, who comes later in the order of Persian kings. Well, anyways, here's a verse from Ezra, chapter 9. We are ban ki avadim anachnu uva'avdutenu lo azavnu Eloheinu. We are bondmen, we are servants, slaves, yet our God has not forsaken us in our bondage. This comes from the passage in Ezra where Ezra and the leadership have returned to the land of Israel, and Persia, the Persian kings allowed them to return, but has extended mercy unto us in the sight of the kings of Persia. Now, when did this occur? That God didn't forsake us? Oh, Bisman Haman, in the time of Haman. There's another rabbi in his introduction. He's got a verse from Psalms. Hirkavta enosh l'roshenu banu va'esh uvamayim. You have caused men to ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, but you brought us out into abundance. Well, what does that have to do with the book of Esther? Through fire, this was in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, the evil one, who cast the righteous into a furnace. Right? Nebuchadnezzar was the one who destroyed Jerusalem, the first temple. So the understanding here is that he's the guy who threw the three Meshach, what was it? I'm forgetting the first one. Meshach and Abednego, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace. It could also be a reference to the fact that he burned down the temple. But in any case, that's fire. And through water, well, that's Pharaoh, because of course he threw the newborn babies into the water, into the Nile. But you brought us out into abundance. And this was in the days of Haman. This is a reference to Haman because obviously we had a feast. Oh, here he says the feast played a pivotal role in the peril and salvation. So the feasting, l'rivaya, abundance and feasting, was a reference to the days of Haman. Okay.
That struck me as a real stretch.
Oh, they're all real stretches. Believe me, a lot of them are real stretches. But you see, but it's pretty clever. I mean, you got to give them points here.
Oh yeah,
You know, so but okay, yeah, it's definitely a stretch. Rabbi Yochanan, okay, here's his verse. His verse also comes from Psalms. He's remembered Zachar chasto ve'emunato leVeit Yisrael. He remembered his mercy and his faithfulness to the house of Israel. Ra'u kol afsei aretz et yishuat Eloheinu. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God. Well, when did all the ends of the earth see God's salvation? Bimei Mordechai ve'Esther, because, well, of course, because the Ahasuerus, we're told he ruled from one end of the earth to the other. So this was the ends of the earth, the Afsei Aretz, during their time, and Mordechai and Esther sent letters about this throughout the kingdom. Here's Reish Lakish. He's got a verse from Proverbs. Ari Nohaim, a roaring lion, Dov Shokek, a ravenous bear, Moshel Rasha, is a roaring lion and a ravenous bear. So is a wicked ruler, Al Amdal, over an impoverished people. So who's the Ari Nohaim? That's Nebuchadnezzar. Because Jeremiah refers to the coming Babylonian conquest as the lion has come from his thicket. So there you have an allusion to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. A hungry bear, this is Ahasuerus, as is written about him. This is from Daniel. It's not really talking about Ahasuerus, but and behold, another beast, a second one like a bear. So it's, but it refers to at least this concept of the Persian rulers as a beast and a bear. So that's reference to Achashverosh. And Rav Yosef taught that these are referred to as a bear in the verse. In the verse are the Persians. So the beast, those are the Babylonians. Bears are Persians. Now, why? Because I don't really know any Persian or Iranian people, but they're compared to a bear because they eat and drink in large quantities like a bear. I think, okay, and they are coated with flesh like a bear. Okay, and they grow their hair long like a bear, and they never rest like a bear, whose manner it is to move about from place to place. So I guess this was referring to their conquest. Let's look at the notes here. Rav Yosef lived among the Persians and was therefore familiar not only with their unique customs with regard to eating and drinking, but also their layers of flesh and long hair. Okay, I don't know if any Iranian people would be insulted by this comparison, but maybe they are hairy. There is evidence that unlike the Babylonians, the Persian let the hair on their head grow long. Okay, so it might be their cultural patterns. The restlessness attributed here to the Persians may be indicative of their being horseback riders. Okay, all right, we're pushing it here. And they never rest like a bear, as opposed to some animals mentioned in the Gemara whose identification is questionable. It is clear that the animal reference in the Gemara here is in fact a bear. Although bears are heavy, as the Gemara here says that they are coated with flesh, they are known to be restless and can run quite quickly. Okay, so there is a picture of a bear running. Okay.
For some of the Eastern religions, excuse me, particularly in India and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and India as well, they do, like, religiously, hair is very sacred.
Yeah.
So I suppose I felt that them calling out, having the hair grow out and stuff to be more of another religious difference, as far as pointing out non-Jews, but for that area. If we're going to reference that Jews and say Gentiles we're going to dress and look to a difference, here's a way to relate that to Persia at that time. Jews,
it's completely possible. I have no idea, but yes, it may be. And he says, and I don't know, maybe compare, the Babylonians had their way of dressing, the Persians were different, and maybe the Persians had long hair or grew their hair long compared to the Babylonians.
It would certainly more so than the Jews. Well, we've already read like how there's these mandates for how Jews, specifically Cohenites, have to, have their hair cut and be more stuff like that for temple practice. For that area at that time, it would make a lot of sense that notions towards facial hair and even long hair on your head would be a difference for Jews versus non-Jews.
Yeah. And then also and then the last part here, and this is kind of interesting because it's a theme that does come through several times in the Talmud, in this passage about the story of Purim. Let's see, wait, the last for a wicked ruler over a poor people. Okay, the wicked ruler, okay, that's Haman, over a poor people. This is Israel, who are referred to this manner because they are poor in their observance of the mitzvot. Now, this is Reish Lakish. It's interesting. He doesn't say al-amdal, poor, impoverished people. He doesn't say because the Jews of that time were poor. He goes with poor in mitzvot. And I think that's really interesting. That why is that the focus? Their poverty of mitzvot. Well, we know that it may be a little bit hard to promote the fact that the Jews were poor in Persia, because from the story of Esther, I mean, Mordechai works as a courtier. Esther rises to be queen. The Jews are at least able to muster a defense of themselves. So I guess partially it's from the text itself. It suggests that Jews weren't poor financially. but I think it gives us an indication of how did this ever happen? How is it that the Jews were on the edge of destruction? And one standard answer is when the Jews don't observe mitzvot, they are endangering themselves. And I think we're going to see this a few more times, this possibility. But so here, poor is in reference to the lack of observance. Next is Rabbi Elazar, and he's got a verse from Ecclesiastes. Through laziness, let's read the first. Ve'atzaltayim yimach hamikareh uveshiflut yadayim idlov habayit. Through laziness, the rafters, hamikareh, sink in, yimach. And through idleness of the hands, the house leaks. So he interprets it all in similar as Reish Lakish did regarding the people. Through the laziness of the Jewish people who didn't occupy themselves with Torah study, the enemy of the Holy One. Now this is a convention. You don't like to say something negative about God, or especially, this is found more often, I think, a euphemism for Israel when they say, if you're saying something negative about Israel, you say the enemies of Israel. Here it's the enemy of God became poor, as it were, that he was unable to help them. So poor is mach. Yimach is the verb is to sink, to fall. Well, you can see that a poor mach is somebody who has sunk. He was unable to help them, as mach is nothing other than poor, as it is stated. But if he be too poor for the valuation, this is in Leviticus, imachu me'erkecha. Person wants to make a vow. I vow my value to the temple, and then you give the tzedakah to the temple. But if you're too poor to do that, then you, I forget what for the value, you don't give the full valuation. You give a smaller amount. And the word mikareh in the verse is referring to no one other than the Holy One, blessed be He, the one who lays the beams. In Psalms 104, ve'ein mikareh ela hakadosh baruch hu, because it says hamikareh b'mayim al yotav, lays the beams of his chambers in the waters, or above the waters. So here he's really read through this verse in Ecclesiastes, is not talking about a guy who's lazy and doesn't build his house properly, and so it falls apart. It's about the Jewish people. When they don't follow the mitzvot, God, in a sense, it weakens God. God is too weak to save them because they've caused their own problems. And when we do mitzvot, we, in a sense, strengthen God by honoring God, observing the covenant. And in this case, the consequence of our behavior, of our lack of doing Torah, makes it harder for God to save us. Very interesting passage, very interesting interpretation. And obviously the lesson there is that's why we should be doing mitzvot. It doesn't just affect us, it has cosmic ramifications. Okay, here's another Rabbi Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. He takes a verse from Psalms again. Shir HaMa'alot, Lulei Adonai Shehaya Lanu, Yomarna Yisrael, Lulei Adonai Shehaya Lanu, Bikum Aleinu Adam. A song of ascents. If not for the Lord who was with us, let Israel now say, if not for the Lord who was with us, when a man rose up against us. The verse speaks of a man, not a king. So you notice here, right? Because that's Haman. Haman was the bad guy, not King Ahasuerus, or he wasn't the main bad guy. Where's the note? Oh, here, let's see. Several explanations are offered for the significance of the distinction between a king and a man. Because a king is concerned with the stability of his kingdom, he will usually be cautious and therefore resistant to decimating a complete nation from within it. Haman, however, was just a guy, not a king, and therefore he wasn't concerned with threats to the throne and attempted to destroy all the Jews within the kingdom. Okay. But you see here, this is a very different interpretation of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak from Rabbi Elazar. Right here, it's God is the Savior. If it wasn't for God, we would be doomed, because this person rose up against us, but God was there to save us. Another passage, Rava. Rava introduced his lecture with a verse from Proverbs. Birvot tzadikim yismach ha'am uvimshol rasha ye'anach am. Okay, when the righteous are on the increase, the people rejoice. But when the wicked man rules, the people mourn. When the righteous are on the increase, the people rejoice. That's Mordechai and Esther. And again, you see here, they're drawing a connection, a linguistic connection. So the Proverbs verse has, Birvot tzadikim yismach ha'am. When Mordechai and Esther and the Jewish led the forces against Haman and they defeated Haman, the city of Shushan, Ha'ir Shushan, Sahala v'samecha. So the word is the same, Yismach and Sameach. But Uvimshol Rasha, when the wicked person rules, Ye'anach am. So the term Ye'anach is to sigh or to translate here as mourn. Well, that was Haman. And what happened when Haman got the ring from the king? Ha'ir Shushan Navocha. The city of Shushan, here he translated as perplexed. They were confused. They were concerned. And the term here is just a, it's like a homophobe. No, I don't think that's the right word. But the words sound like each other. There's an assonance. Ye'anach navocha. They both have the n, the nun, and the ch sound, even though the letters are different. But they have those sounds. So
It's sort of like homonyms.
homonym, yeah. What's the other? But it's not a hum. It's a hama.
They're not homonyms, but
It's a hama. There's another one where they sound like each. It's not homophobe.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, right. Homophobe. That's completely different. No, homonym and well, whatever.
I don't know the other word.
Yeah, it's another one. They sound like each other, but that's okay. All right. Next one. Rav Matana Amar Mechacha. So he began his lecture from here. He had a verse from Deuteronomy. Ki mi goy gadol asher lo Elohim krovim elav. What great nation? What is it, or who is the great nation that whose God is so close to them? That is to witness the miracle in the days of Mordechai and Esther. Rav Ashi started from here, same place, same chapter. Oy o hanisa Elohim, or has God ventured to go and take him a nation from the midst of another nation? As in the times of Esther, God saved the Jewish people who were scattered throughout the Persian Empire. Okay, usually that's understood as Egypt, that they took the nation of Israel out of the nation of Egypt, but here he relates it to the Persian Empire. Let's see, what's the note here? The meaning is that the Purim redemption was similar to the redemption of Egypt, which is the subject of the verse. Both were redemptions of a nation from the midst of another nation, in the sense that both redemptions involved a reversal of fortune for the two nations involved. In Egypt, a body of water that had been the means to drown Jewish babies became the means to drown the Egyptian pursuers of Israel. Similarly, in the case of Purim, lots were cast to pick a day for the destruction of Israel, this day ended up becoming a day of annihilation for the enemies of Israel. All right, so that's pretty good. Here's the next one. Oh, now we get to going through verse by verse, a commentary on the book of Esther. Vayehi bimei Achashverosh. Amar Rav. Vadonai v'hi hada dichtiv. The term here, vayihi, is made up of two words, vai and he, woe and mourning. This is as it is written, and there you shall sell yourselves to your bondsmen and bondswomen, and no one shall buy you. The repetitive nature of the verse indicating that no one would be willing to buy you for certain. They don't even want you for slaves, and rather they'll just want you to kill you. So it's a doubly horrific situation for the Jews, and that's symbolized by the dual term vayehi.
The Deuteronomy verse doesn't have vayehi, so I was a little
Wait,
confused.
which verse doesn't have vayehi?
And there you shall sell yourselves.
Oh, so
I was a little confused.
right. So I think I think what the meaning is, vi and he is a double negative situation, double horrific situation.
You can replace any double negative by any other.
Well, here in Deuteronomy, no, the verse in Deuteronomy from chapter 28 is a part of the curses.
Yeah.
And in those curses, that prediction of if you don't follow my Torah, these are the terrible things that are going to happen.
Yeah.
And not only are you going to sell yourselves, you try to sell yourselves as slaves, that no one will want you.
So these two things
Right. So
equal the two parts of vayehi.
Right, exactly. So it's a double horrible situation, horrific, as he says, doubly horrific situation. You're willing to sell yourselves, and the people and nobody, they don't even want to buy you, they just want to kill you. So even buying you isn't a way out of your tragedy. Even becoming, enslaving yourself isn't a way out of your tragedy. And I just think of, because we think of oy, but I remember when I was in Israel, I was a tutor for a little boy, and his family was a Sephardic family. But even in Israel today, when we say oi, like oi, they say vai. He would say why? Oh, he'd say why? And I'm like, why is he saying the word why in English? That doesn't make any sense to me. But why is oi. So in Israel today, that's how some people refer to oi, like a terrible thing. Now, then Shmuel he introduced this was his commentary. And yet for all, let's see, here's the introduction. And yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, this is from the curses in Leviticus. It's a little less horrific than in Deuteronomy. Lo me'astim v'lo ga'altim lecha lo tam. I will not reject them, and I will not reject them. I will not abhor them to destroy them. Okay, so lo ma'astim refers to the Greeks, that's the Hellenists. Lo ga'altim refers to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. Lecha lo tam in the days of Haman. So even though God rejected us during the Hellenistic period, I mean, in the sense of, that we were enslaved and lost sovereignty. And in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, the temple was destroyed. And I think here Yevanim have to be understood as Romans. Lecha lo tam, to destroy them completely. In the days of Haman, another attempt to destroy us, but not completely. They were saved in the end. Lehafer briti itam, to break my covenant with them. That's a reference to the days of the Persians. Ki ani Adonai Elohehem this is the in the days of the great Armageddon, Gog and Magog. Let's see what it has to say here, because he talks of in the days of Vespasian. The Hebrew text reads Nebuchadnezzar, but his English version, this is Steinsaltz, has Vespasian. In order to reflect the original version of the text, that is, the earliest manuscripts of the Talmud have Vespasian in there, not Nebuchadnezzar. And he suggests that to avoid offending the Romans, the censor removed the phrase "in the days of Vespasian," a Roman emperor, and replaced it with the less provocative Nebuchadnezzar. Now that makes sense because the Romans came after the Greeks, although then Haman is before the Romans, the Greeks and the Romans. So also I just wondered, why would you not want to offend the Romans? You don't know, a lot of the censorship of the Talmud was not to offend the Christians. So unless the Christians understood that they were the Jews saw them as the successors to the Romans, I didn't really understand why they would change it in that case. But anyway, that's the passage here.
When was this written?
That I know. Shmuel,
Because Christianity wasn't really a going thing at the time the Talmud started, was it?
right. That's why I was wondering why they would censor. And Shmuel is the first generation of Talmudists in Babylonia. Wait, is Shmuel in Rav and Shmuel or Babylonia?
So
I'm not really sure why. I mean, the Greeks I get, they were the Hellenists. That was post Alexander the Great. Vespasian I get. It would have made sense for Shmuel to mention Vespasian because the second temple had just been destroyed. And then I guess to destroy them utterly, he's referring to Haman, because they weren't destroyed utterly as compared to the destruction of the temple. I'm not really sure. So I'm not sure why the censor would have removed Vespasian. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about this one. Why that change would have been necessary? But he says it's to avoid the censor. I mean, what we do know is that the earlier manuscripts had Vespasian, and then when they got to the printed text, it was Nebuchadnezzar. So they were obviously removing it for some reason. They didn't want to offend somebody. I'm guessing it was the Christians.
but there's a certain sense in which the Christians are the successors in trade to the Romans, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The
Right.
Roman Empire became Christian.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's possible, but then you would be concerned about offending Christians, not the Romans. So I don't know. Unless, we're talking about the first printed texts, and some of the early printed texts were done in Italy. So I don't know, maybe that was the concern. You didn't want to
Offend the printer.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that change would have been made. But all right, so let's go. Now, alternative understanding was taught in a Baraita. Lo me'astim. So here's that same verse. Lo me'astim, I won't abhor them or reject them. That's referring to the Kasdim, the Chaldeans. That's the Babylonians. Shehamadidi lahem Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Those are the three guys. That's the Hebrew names of the three guys who got thrown into the furnace by Nebuchadnezzar. The Lo Ga'altim, and I won't reject them or abhor them. Bimei Yevanim, that's the Greeks. Shehamadati lahem Shimon Hatzadik. Oh, so I see what's going on here. Here is the in each of these generations, when there was some group that was just intent on destroying the Jewish nation, the Babylonians, well, Daniel rose up. This is like that. Well, that's the song, right? In every age, a hero or sage, a rose or age. Bimei Yevanim, that was the Greeks, but that's Hellenism. Shimon HaTzadik arose. That was that was the time of the Chashmonai. That's Hanukkah, right? Because even though the Hanukkah, the Assyrians were Hellenized. It was the Hellenized leaders. The Seleucids and the Ptolemies were ruling the world at that time. So here, that's the Yevanim. And Shimon HaTzadik was one of the members, or one of the last members of the Knesset, Anshe Knesset Agdolah, which is that group, that amorphous group that we're not sure who they are. But we know that Shimon HaTzadik was one of the final leaders in that group. That's what we're told. L'chalotam, that refers back again to Haman, not to completely destroy them, because she'amarati lahem Mordechai ve'Esther, lehafer briti itam, and to completely break the covenant with them. Bimei romiim. This was, see, all right. So here they talk about the Romans. All right. Itam shehamarati lahem shel beit Rabbi v'chachmei Dorot. I appointed the sages of the house of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and future rabbis. And ki ani Adonai Eloheihem, for I am the Lord their God. La'atid lavo, in the future. She'ein kol umah v'lashon yichola lishlot bahem. In the future, one day when the great redemption occurs, no nation will subjugate them further. Now, let's hear it. So here he says, in the days of the Romans, the Hebrew text reads the Persians. Wait a minute, that's not what the Hebrew text here says Romi'im. But okay, he says that the translation is Romans in order to reflect the original version of the text, which was altered by the censor in order to avoid it. So he says, that's interesting. So even though his Hebrew text here says Romi'im, he's telling us that the early versions of the text were changed by the censors to Persians. And his text, his Hebrew text, and his English translation reflect that. Okay. So there was consistency. He wasn't confusing us. He says there's a consistency there. Rabbi Levi Amar Mehacha. So here's another rabbi. He introduced the text from here. This is his verse. He's from Numbers. But if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those whom you allow to remain of them shall be as thorns in your eyes. Well, this unfortunately happened. King Saul did not destroy Amalek. King Saul did not destroy Agag, who was an Amalekite. Haman was an Agagi. He came from the Agag, and he was a thorn in the eyes of Israel. So by not doing what you were supposed to do, getting rid of the bad guys, you allowed them to remain. Rabbi Chia Amar Mehacha Behaya Ka'asher Dimiti La'asot Lahem Aseh Lachem. It shall come to pass that as I thought to do unto them, so I shall do unto you. Because you didn't wipe them out, because you didn't get rid of evil, the idol worshippers, the pagans, I'm going to do to you. Prior to the miracle of Purim, the Jewish people were subject to the punishment that the Torah designated for its enemies because they didn't fulfill God's commandments. You see here again this strain that was kind of our fault, that the potential, that Haman was even able to succeed. Here we do some puns on the term Achash ve'rosh, who also he isn't looked at positively by the rabbis. One possibility, the Achash ve'rosh, Achiv shel Rosh, the brother of the head and of the same character as the head, Ben Gilo shel Rosh. who is this talking about? The brother of the head, the brother of the wicked Nebuchadnezzar, who's called head. And we have a verse in Daniel, you are the head of gold, of the same character as the head is of Nebuchadnezzar, who killed the Jews, was Achashverosh, who sought to kill the Jews, right? Achashverosh was totally cool with Haman's plans. So Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple, and Achashverosh sought to destroy the foundations for the temple, which was laid by Zerubbabel. When they started to see Achashverosh, his Persian predecessors, Cyrus and Darius, allowed the Jews to come back and told them, hey, go rebuild the temple. But according to this interpretation or this comment, Achashverosh wanted to destroy the very foundations of the temple. And here we have another Shmuel. Achashverosh has the similar to Shachor, Hush Rachu, darkened. The face of the Jewish people were darkened in his days like the bottom of a pot. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan has a different explanation. Everyone who recalled him said, woe upon his head, ach l'rosho. Okay, here's another one, Achashverosh. Everyone became poor, rash, in his days, because at the end of the story, as Abe Getz used to point out, that even at the end, when the story, a happy ending, but the king does what he does, what every king does. He raised taxes, so everybody became poor because he raised taxes at the end of the story. Here we're back to who Achashverosh. This is back to the verse by verse explanation. Who Achashverosh. He was Achashverosh, but they're translated as he, as like Achashverosh's essence was, or his very essence was to be Achashverosh. He never changed. He was nasty at the beginning of his reign. He was nasty at the end of his reign. Don't think he's any different. And here we have every time, so they're going to say every time it says who in a verse describing a person, it's describing that their essence, their very name was their essence. Esav was evil from beginning to end. Datan v'Aviram, who Datan v'Aviram? Datan and Aviram, they were miserable from the beginning of the story to their end, to their destruction. Who Melech Achaz, the king Achaz, he was a terrible king. He was always, his very essence was Achazness. But wait a minute. Hold on here. We've got some passages where who is positive. So it's not just evil, it's that who seems to describe their essentialness. Avraham hu Avraham. He was righteous from the beginning to end. So Avraham described his essence. Aharon, hu Aharon u Moshe. Their very essence was who they were. Their essence of goodness and righteousness was who they were always. David, who Hakatan. In this case, David was the young one, the youngest. Who bekatnu to, in his youth until his end, until the end of his life, he was always a good guy. He was always a righteous king. Kishem shebekatnu to hiktin. Oh, no. Well, his essence was similar from beginning to end. In this case, Katan describes his nature. He was a very humble guy. He was humble when he was little, and he was humble when he got older. He humbled himself before anybody who was wise. So that term who is a way of describing somebody's essence. They didn't change from beginning to end. Moshe, okay, Hamolech. This is describing Achashverosh. Shemalach me'atzmo. Oh, he ruled from his own initiative. That is, he ruled on his own. He didn't have, Yiches. L'sheva. So some people said it was to shevach, to his to honor, credit him, and some to his disgrace. Amri la l'shevach de lo hava inish dechashev lemalke kavate. There was no other man as fit as him to be king, so they made him king because he stood out among others. Others to ganai, to his discredit, that he really wasn't deserving to be king. It's just he blackmailed and paid off to become a king. All right, Mehoduvat Kush. Here is just, the question is, where is Hodu and where is Kush? So one said, Kush b'sofa olam, v'chad amar, Hodu b'chush ha'ol, b'sofa olam, v'chush b'sofa olam. One said it's describing the how tremendous was his empire. Hodu's at one end, Kush is at the other. Usually Hodu is understood as like India, Southeast Asia, and Kush is Ethiopia. But some argue that Hodu and Kush are situated next to each other. And the verse means as follows: just as he reigned with ease over adjacent countries, so too he reigned over countries from one end of the world to the other. Wait, where are we getting to? Still not in, oh my God, okay. For he had to, so here's the explanation of, in Kings, it describes from Tifsa even to Gaza. Tifsa is at one, this is regarding Solomon. Tifsach was at one end of the world, Gaza is the other. Other people say, no, they were next to each other. So similar interpretation. Again, the opening verse continues 120, over 7 and 20 and 100 provinces, 127. At first he reigned over 7, then he expanded his kingdom to 20, and then another 100. But if so, we also describe the life of Amram as 7 and 30 and 100 years. Would you expound the same way? First he was 7, then he was 30, then he was 100. It's different here because in the book of Esther, this verse was not necessary, it's superfluous, because it said from Hodu to Kush. Sounds like he ruled over the entire world. What does it have to tell us? 7, 20, and 100 provinces, rather to explain that that's how he came to rule. He grew his kingdom. All right, now we had 3 guys who ruled the entire world: Ahab, Achashverosh, and Nebuchadnezzar. And we'll just move along here. So we have verses that describe each of these. Ahab is the funny one. Ahab hated Elijah the prophet, and he was looking for him to kill him, and he couldn't find him. And when one of his servants, Obadiah, found him, he said, he's looked like from top to bottom for you. Well, there's no nation or kingdom where my master is not sent to seek you, and he couldn't find you. You were hiding very well. Well, if he went through every kingdom in the world, he must have been ruling every kingdom. Okay. Nebuchadnezzar is another verse that describes that he ruled over the entire world, and same thing with Achashverosh. But the problem is wait a minute, there are other great rulers. How come they didn't mention them? Well, this is kind of a curiosity. King Solomon, he ruled over the entire world. Well, he didn't complete his kingship. And the Gemara relates an opinion that King Solomon ceased to rule and went into exile, at which time he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. The rabbis disagree there as to whether he later returned to the throne or whether he remained a commoner the rest of his life. Very interesting story about Shlomo. I mean, it's not the impression we get from the book, but that's the fables and traditions that we get. Okay, so according to that, maybe he didn't finish his rule as king. Okay, what about, oh wait, here's the story about his being, yeah, here's the information. He was first a king, then a commoner, but according to the other one, he was a king, then a commoner, and then he became a king again. Okay. Also, another possible answer is Solomon didn't just rule over human worlds, he also ruled over the supernatural world, the demons and spirits. And there's a lot of stories of Solomon, a lot of, I guess you call it ancient, what's the word, not fables, but folk tales that Solomon ruled over demons. What about Sancherib? He ruled over the entire world according to Isaiah. Yeah, but the one thing he couldn't, Sancherib was defeated when he tried to conquer Jerusalem in the time of Isaiah. So he didn't really rule over the entire world. What about Darius? Darius was the Persian emperor. Didn't he rule over the whole world from this verse? No, because it says he ruled over 120 provinces, or satraps. And that's from the book of Daniel. So he was short 7 provinces. And Cyrus, thus said Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. Well, that's just Cyrus boasting. He didn't really rule over him. He was just, there's no truth to that. But since Cyrus said it himself, we just assume it was him boasting about it. Okay. Here we are in the second verse. In those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, implying that the events to follow took place during the first year of his reign, and afterwards it says in the third year of his reign, indicating that it was the third year, not the first. So isn't this a contradiction? No, according to Rava, when he sat, it is intended to indicate that he acted not immediately upon his rise to the throne, but rather after his mind was settled. And he overcame his anxiety and worry with regard to the redemption of the Jewish people. So he was ruling for a couple of years, but he's very anxious about those Jews because he knew of the previous king of Babylonia who tried to calculate when the supposed redemption of the Jewish people was over and that prophecy didn't come true. Meaning, Jeremiah prophesied that after 70 years are accomplished for Babylonia, the Jews would return. Now, the problem is accomplished. What does that mean? We have another verse in Daniel that after 70 years of the desolations of Jerusalem. So are these different things? How do we calculate those 70 years when the Jews come back and rebuild and are able to rebuild the temple? So Ahasuerus was a little bit anxious. He heard about the story of Belshazzar. And in the book of Daniel, Belshazzar dies because it tells in the story of Daniel that he was using the vessels that were stolen from the temple and they were partying with them. And then this hand shows up and writes a message, and Daniel interprets the message in which he tells Belshazzar, you will be punished because of your exploitation of these sacred goblets. Why did Belshazzar use those goblets? Well, because he calculated that the 70-year prophecy had gone by and nothing happened. 45 years of Nebuchadnezzar, then 23 of Evil Merodach, and 2 of his own. So that was 70 years, and the redemption didn't occur. So he thought he was safe. But the Gemara is, where do we derive the Nebuchadnezzar reign for 45 years? So we got a little off-ramp here. They were exiled in the 7th year. They were exiled in the 8th year. Then they were exiled in the 18th year. There were a couple of exiles that Nebuchadnezzar forced the Jewish people to leave. 7th year, 8th year, 18th year, and the 19th year. So here we go back to this counting. When should they have started the count of the 70 years? And here we were explained, they were exiled in the 7th year after the subjugation of Jehoiakim was the king. But it was the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Then they were exiled a second time in the 18th year after the subjugation of, well, actually, this was after Zedekiah attempted to rebel again. Zedekiah was a descendant of Jehoiakim. He attempted to rebel again and was defeated. And then there was another exile. That was in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So in the first year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar conquered Nineveh, which was the north of Assyria. In the second year, he conquered Jehoiakim. Okay, let's see. And then Evil-Merodach lifted Jehoiachin out of a prison. The Gemara calculates, since Evil-Merodach acted in the first year of his reign, immediately after coming to power, it turns out that Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 8 years before he sent Jehoiachin, the king, into exile, and 37 years during which Jehoiachin was in prison. This equals the 45 years of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Then there's 23 years of Evil-Merodach, that's known through tradition. And then you've got 2 years of Belshazzar. This brings us to 70. And at that point, he said, okay, hey, the prophecy didn't come true. I'm going to make use of these vessels. But then Daniel says, you blew it because you've lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you. In that night, Belshazzar died, or actually was killed. And that was because he screwed up his calculation. And right after Belshazzar is killed, Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So this was when the Persians took over. So now we get back to Ahasuerus. So he said, wait a minute, Belshazzar erred. Well, I'm going to calculate, but I'm not going to make a mistake. I'm not going to err. Because he figured, I figured out the source of Belshazzar's mistake. It's written 70 years for the kingdom of Babylonia. For the king, okay, what is meant by for Babylonia? These words are referring to the 70 years for the exile of Babylonia, not the 70 years that the Babylonians ruled, but actually the 70 years that they were exiled. Well, how many years are still lacking from the 70 years? 8 years, because he calculated and inserted in their stead 1 year of Belshazzar. Oh, 8 years, because remember, that was Nebuchadnezzar didn't conquer, didn't make the exile happen until his 8th year, until 8 years. Okay, so in that case, 8 years, so Belshazzar screwed up by 8 years. 1 year, then you've got 5 years of Darius and Cyrus and 2 years of his own. That makes up to 5 years. So now we've got 70 again. Once he saw that 70 years had been completed, the Jewish people were still not redeemed. Okay, now I know for sure they're not going to be redeemed. The prophecy was a mistake. Now I can use those vessels. But he was wrong. He messed up his calculation. And so what happened as punishment, Satan came and danced among them and killed Vashti. Now, why, if Ahasuerus screwed up, Satan would kill Vashti and not Ahasuerus? Okay, whatever. That was the bad thing that happened because he messed up. But the Gemara asked, but he calculated properly. Wait a minute, he was correct. No, because he too erred, for he should have counted from the destruction of Jerusalem at the time of the exile of Zedekiah and not from the first exile of Jehoiachin. That was year number 18, I think. But he's got here, 18 minus 9. Wait, 18 minus 8 would be, or I guess 19. All right, I'm not sure how they did the 11, but we had up here 19 was the year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign when he got rid of Zedekiah. The 8th year was when he exiled Jehoiachin. So maybe that's the 11. 11, for that was the exile of Zedekiah took place 11 years after that of Jehoiachin. How many years did Achashverosh reign as king? 14. Indeed, in his 14th year, then, the temple should have been built. If so, then why is it written, then the work of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, ceased? This is from Ezra. So it ceased until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia, which indicates that the temple was not built during the entire reign of Achashverosh. Yes, because they were partial years. So I guess like in the middle of the year, I guess this is what it means, is that the middle of the year of Belshazzar, that's when Darius the Mede took over. And then you've got to complete the 7 years, it was necessary to wait until the 2nd year of the rule of Darius number 2, when the temple was built. All right, let's just do one more paragraph. Tanya Nami Hachi, there's also a Baraita that says when Belshazzar was killed, there was still another year left for Babylonia before the reckoning of the 70 years was completed. And then Darius arose and completed it. So although 70 years were previously counted according to Belshazzar's count, after the exile of Jehoiakim, because some years were only partial, there was still 1 year left in order to complete those 70 years. Okay, I thought there was going to be no math in this exam. But anyway, that's the idea here is that Achashverosh, they were all trying to prove that this prophecy of Jeremiah, that the Jews would rebuild the temple 70 years later, was false. It didn't come true. And so therefore they could exploit these vessels from the temple, and they blew it. They didn't count it properly. And so finally Darius II, and so they were, all these emperors were punished in some way, but Darius II, who was did oversee the beginning of the rebuilding of the temple, they sent back those vessels. So they went back to where they belonged. All right, so we'll start next week. We're still talking about the calculation, but this time from Daniel's point of view. All right, so there we go.
I feel like there's a good source there for a lot of this tradition of going extra in an effort to not mess up. We need to do things bigger. We need to go a little bit harder just in case we're wrong, and to prevent from inadvertently sinning in that respect.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I know the rabbis love numbers, and they have, they very often they need to reconcile the numbers that they're given again with from the divine source. And it's our responsibility to come up with how those numbers work themselves out in reality.
There are also a lot of inconsistent numbers.
Oh, yes. Remember
this hasn't cited Ezekiel, but trying to figure out the years in Ezekiel is it's already inconsistent itself, let alone whether it's consistent with
right. And remember the promise to Abraham, or the covenant with Abraham, where your descendants will last for 4 generations, and then the Torah tells us they were in Egypt for 420 years. It's like, wait a minute, how is that possible? That they did 4 generations, 420 years, and then so they try it. Well, you got to start counting from this point and not that point. And there's always this desire to make everything smooth out. All right, well, we'll pick this up. We're now in some of the fun stuff with the explanations of the book of Esther. So we'll be prepared for Purim this year. And all right, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
All right, take care.